when it starts recording, because it just tells me maybe, oh, it's starting.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Prometheus Storage Working Group. Today is April 6th. And we, I believe, only have one item on the agenda that I added there. But if you have anything else that you want to discuss, feel free to still put it in there. I actually have one other thing if we have some leftover time. But the first thing that I wanted to discuss, and this was sort of, I kind of told Björn about this already because it will likely be kind of interesting for the histogram work that he's doing as well. My use case here is essentially something that we want to probably try to do in Conprof, which the overall theme is essentially that we don't necessarily index every single series, but that we index groups of series in a single chunk. And if you think of the histograms, for example, it makes a lot of sense to essentially group all of the buckets into each other, right? Into one chunk design. I assume Björn is going to think a lot more about the actual design for histograms. My use case, as I said, is kind of for Conprof, and that we kind of decompose individual profiles into their samples and then kind of store these as metrics. That's kind of the idea that we wanna try out. And I just kind of wanted to bring it into this circle because Björn and I had a very quick conversation that this probably would make sense. So I just wanted to kind of throw the idea into the room to see if anybody can think off the top of their head that like this is a totally stupid idea. We should not. There's this particular reason why we shouldn't even investigate this. Yeah. Any thoughts?
So, I mean, my fear is that just kind of moving part of the index into a chunk as a sub-index or whatever we call it, that this might not bias a lot. I'm not super familiar with how indices perform if you distribute them differently. Maybe that's at least if you don't touch high cardinality metrics, then you don't notice and your index is not super large. But I kind of hope, I mean, in case of histograms, I hope that the gain comes from the correlation between the buckets. Like it's not just that you don't have individual index entries for every bucket, but you also benefit from saving buckets together in a compressed way, essentially. And I'm not sure if that applies to just high cardinality series in general, or it depends on how you group them, or if you want to leverage it. But then, and this goes more into TSDB internals, which I'm also not super familiar with, I kind of imagine that in this way, we don't need essentially like data structure per series. Like right now, like a series is a thing, right? It has a reference and memory and everything. And we usually say there's like a 10 kilobyte RAM cost per series. And I'm kind of hoping, but that depends on how this internally works, that we could save on this like per series fixed RAM overhead, but just having, it's kind of in a file system where you save the file in the inode, right? If the file is very small, that you essentially save, it's not just like, it's not fundamentally indexing effort you save, but it's a more compact representation. That's kind of where my hope is, but it's not super educated.
Yeah, that's sort of along the same lines as what I was thinking. Like the very obvious thing that we're saving is that we're not like storing the timestamp multiple times, right? We save one timestamp for the theoretically many series, right? And then store the timestamps and values actually separately, right? And also, one thing that this will definitely do is it will be very invasive into the TSDB interfaces, into the chunk interface, for example, because today the iterator just returns the timestamp value like tuple, right? whereas here we would actually be saying it should be returning a series set, right? Maybe even a specialized series set so that we don't keep allocating the same labels over and over.
Yeah, the same for histograms, right? This is again where it's very correlated.
Exactly. This was talking generally for all the use cases that we've talked about.
With the timestamp, I mean, that's the thing we had in mind for a while. I mean, I don't know who exactly, but I guess a number of people that since all the series from a single scrape have the same timestamp, they could kind of be saved in separately. And then especially when we had this, we now adjust the clock a tiny bit to have super regular timestamps. You get into, we kind of just need the phase angle essentially in most cases, and we don't need to save the timestamp at all, more or less. But I think that's kind of that we could leverage that even without this whole idea.
Yes, I think so as well.
I think, I mean, not we would automatically leverage this with this idea, but I think we should not use it as a selling point because we could use that advantage without this idea. Yeah.
And in regards to what you said earlier about kind of having a, let's call it a secondary index. It's kind of a, not even secondary, it's kind of an N index, right? Like, because it's per chunk. I suspect either it depends on just how high cardinality the data is that you're putting in there, will affect just how bad the kind of overhead for the secondary index is. I think with kind of the thing that we've been discussing a couple of times here, if the index itself is cache oblivious, it's probably not that bad, but I have no data to back this up. So this would be something that we would need to definitely investigate. And frankly, sure, it's high cardinality for my use case, but it's effectively still pretty bound to a couple of thousand series within a chunk. It's more that I don't necessarily have consistency across chunks. But I think this is kind of a different characteristic to Prometheus metrics.
Can you elaborate again, Frederick? What's the use case you're having?
So for conprof, I essentially want to investigate this so that we stop treating profiles kind of as log data. Sorry, I just got paged. That we stop treating it as log data and instead kind of treat it as the structured data that it truly is, and kind of decompose the profiles and save the samples as if it were a series of metrics. But we can't do that in today's TSDB format because the way that the resulting metrics would be way too high cardinality to store in a reasonable way.
Because the label is essentially a function signature, right? But yeah,
right. And actually, I'm still writing kind of a design doc to flesh this a bit out more, and I don't want to delve into it too deeply because it's not really on topic here. But it would also allow us to only save kind of the raw data of the samples, like the location ID, and keep all the mapping, all the metadata completely separate from the samples. And that way we're not saving the same metadata millions of times in the conprof database, right?
So essentially interning as well on the side. Okay.
In a way, yeah, I guess you could say that.
Do you want the metadata in TSB then as well, or would that be a separate thing?
I believe it will be a separate thing.
Okay, because that bleeds into this idea of having a kind of richer metadata store in TSDB.
Yeah,
but that's kind of another interesting topic.
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to you in direct messages already, I I feel like conprof is probably gonna only be conceptually similar to TSDB in the future, and I believe it'll probably evolve into its own kind of storage format. I think I wanted to bring the kind of high cardinality chunk design here because I feel like there could be at least a chance to compare notes about this rather similar approach, I think.
Do you think it can be used for exemplars as well if we want to store them on in the TSDB?
I would need to think about that a bit more. The reason why this would work for conprof is because we kind of realized that, as I said earlier, the profiles really don't behave like log data, but they really behave like metrics data with some additional metadata. And we kind of consciously just did some storage so that we could understand the characteristics of everything more, right? And now we're at the point where we understand the usage patterns of people better and the patterns of the data itself. So now we can go back and reflect, like, this is how we should have done it. And I'm not sure we're at that point with exemplars, is what I was trying to say. I feel like we still have some more experiences to make there.
Yeah.
I have one related, but not precisely the same point. I had similar-ish discussions with both Paul Dix and Rob Skillington in the past, trying to explore potentially complex data types and where to fit the data and such. And both of them did extensive thinking about where to put what. This is not precisely what you just described, what they did in their past. Long story short, I would just recommend once you have a half-done design doc to just tag both of them to see what they are thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One thing, circling back to what Julian was just saying, I still feel like exploring whether exemplars could be kind of string time series is maybe worth exploring, but I don't know for sure. It definitely can't work in the same way as we store float values today. It would need to be significantly different, and I don't know how invasive a change that would be. It's just my hunch that this is something I would try out if it was my priority.
I just want to add that we already have this secondary index in Thanos with downsampling. So we, as you probably know, downsampling in Thanos is essentially 5 different series, which are aggregations of the the raw resolution. So we kind of cheat and put 5 series as a one chunk because all of them have the same exactly timestamp. And ideally, at the start, you know what aggregations you want to retrieve, and yeah, you essentially traverse. You get the whole chunk and get the kind of the byte, kind of whole byte. I guess I don't think we have any optimization to get only part of the aggregation so far. So there's definitely lots of well, that's exactly the same what we are talking about here with profiles.
Yeah, it's so similar that we're probably gonna copy many of the
code. Yeah. But
strategy.
It was not invasive. It was not invasive. Like, we don't fork TSDB. We can actually put this in a chunk encoding directly. So I wonder how. It's not a series set for us. We essentially construct and cast it into a special chunk with multiple aggregation of chunks. But I wonder if and that was not invasive. Like, it's, I don't remember how, but like essentially it's not as invasive as you explained with the series set returned by the iterators. I wonder. I
mean, you still return numbers, right? So you just pick one essentially in this case.
Well, the thing is, we don't, because we don't iterate over samples at this level. We only implemented that downsampling to be iterated over chunks. I think that's why we are winning here, right? I mean, we are winning in terms of we don't need to have invasive changes to the sample iterator, right? where that might be. Again, we have different abstractions on those levels, so maybe you can play with that, Frederick.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One definitely problem is that we need to we need to be able to reconstruct profiles in time as well, and I feel like doing that via metric series is going to be kind of weird. But this is just a hunch. I don't have experience to back this up.
The problem here you have is that there's 5 of those aggregations. In profiles, you have thousands functions on the stack, if not more. So I think that there's different characteristics.
Yeah. So in that sense, actually, the only aggregation that we need is merges. It's the only aggregation that truly matters. Yeah.
I have no idea what that means. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. As I said, I think we were this already went further off topic than I intended. I just wanted to share the general thought of these kind of quote unquote high cardinality chunk designs, and that we'll probably be investing some time into exploring this, and that there's some similarities to this in histograms. So we'll see eventually how this works out. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think conprof is also a special case because it's kind of like a complex data structure in a time series. But this could perhaps also be used for like truly high cardinality, like short-lived time series essentially, where you have like super high churn and that blows up your cardinality. But if this series is just like 5 samples or something, and you don't have your own chunk for that and your own series, it's just like all in one chunk for all the short-lived mini series, then this might also go into the same concept.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have 2 more topics. Bartek, do you want to take the next one? Exemplars and remote write?
I was very lazy and I was kind of asking, do we have any work on the exemplars for remote write? Because it ended up being very popular feature and users are playing with it already on Thanos. We have exemplar supports for a global view on top of Prometheus with sidecars, but we are missing the case of when people actually send this data to the object storage or via remote write to the receivers, you cannot leverage exemplars at that point. So I was curious how we can help with Prometheus support for remote write and exemplars. And it looks like someone linked the PR, which is 20 days old kind of conversation. So I guess we need to just get to it and try to move this forward. So yeah.
I mean, Callum is probably the person working on that, right?
Yes.
Ganesh said something.
Yes.
Callum is working on it.
Okay, cool. Any blockers on that, or just work that has to be designed?
I think it is kind of blocking on me. I had some comments on the write head log record. So I have to look at it again, give feedback, and basically it's blocked on reviews.
Just poke me as well, so I can help as well. But I don't track notifications anymore, so feel free to ping me.
Yeah.
Okay, and on a similar note, I was asked by some people about, exemplars are great. What about my recording rules? Can I have exemplars for my recording rules? And I was like, this is kind of easy, right? Because easy if we simplify this problem by just choosing any exemplar that is part of the source metrics of the recording rules, because those will be examples of the case that are packed in this aggregated metric, right? But probably it was one user from some, I don't know, Czech company, whatever. He was like, I want all of them. Obviously, that will not work so easily. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about recording rules and exemplars. And the kind of use case is like, imagine people are doing aggregations on their Prometheus servers with exemplars, and they are only remote writing those recording rules.
Yeah. So that bleeds into the long discussion we had about the query API for exemplars, where we essentially said, like, the one faction said this should be automatic and Grafana should just display relevant exemplars, and if it's a special case, you have to do something about it. While the other faction said this can't even be solved, it's wrong so often, so the user should just say which exemplars they actually want to display. And this one use case was, if what you display comes out of a recording rule, how can the system know what exemplars went into it? Right? So yeah, it's tough. So Julian, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think that the current API for exemplar is not great, and I pointed that at the pull request. But the issue is that when I tried the exemplar the first time, I went from a dashboard to exploring Grafana. And because like the dashboard had like a multiplication or something like that, my exemplar were like 1,000 times lower than the actual query. So I think that if you add recording rule on top of that, this will even confuse user more, because you have an exemplar with the value 5, but the recording rule will give you a value 500 or 5,000. I think we should have gone for a more select API for exemplar when you need to decide exactly which exemplar you want, because like we don't do any prompt modification, any calculation yet the exemplar, and that's very confusing.
I like the idea. I think we should make it as stupid as we possibly can as of right now, and make it experimental. Of course, it will not be super useful. What Julian just said is completely right. I'm personally thinking a lot about tail-based sampling, where maybe I want to have logic in selecting what specifically are useful exemplars. But I think all of those use cases will only be more understood if we already have something which works-ish. So I would much rather have something which is really stupid but available behind a feature flag, and just see what breaks and how it breaks and what pain points we uncover while people are using it.
Which is what we have now.
Yes, but also with for recording rules. I'm talking specifically about recording rules, because there I see tail-based sampling and such also, but I don't see it today and I don't see it tomorrow. My point is, make something work, make it as stupid as we possibly can, even if we just randomly select one or always the first or what have you. So people can play with it and we can gain experience how people use it and what their pain points are.
Yeah, I fully agree with Fuji. That makes sense to me. Like essentially, yeah, Julian, the first thing people right now have, I want my exemplars of recording rules. I don't. And this is not very useful. So let's just put like something YOLO stupid, make it obvious it's stupid and experimental. So we will, oh, I have exemplar, but like I want this one and not this one. And now we can play with it. But query layer sounds like might be needed at some point. Yeah, good discussion. Thank you.
Would it be useful to then store the original full label set in the exemplar instead of just the trace ID?
For the one,
useful, but the question is it worth enough? Yeah.
Looking at it from a different angle, it's absolutely realistic if we just do the most stupid thing that we will have this in the next release as an experimental feature. If we try to make it smart, it will not be in the next release. I would much rather, no, my point is I would much rather enable the wider ecosystem to play with this than to try and make it perfect or even half useful. Because parade needs to be inverted here. It will be a lot of work to get even something roughly useful, like more than just plain stupid.
Yeah, because currently Prometheus does not expose open metrics, and like recording rules are used in federation, so we would need to pass federation to open metrics to have this really useful at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, and all this kind of thing will be a lot easier to explore and get right if we have something super stupid. And making recording rules be aware of exemplars seems a good step.
Nice, perfect. Thank you.
Related, What about alerts? Should alerting rules also just export a random exemplar as part of their annotation set?
I think it should be exactly the same, no? So it's a dashboard that you can provide maybe a certain exemplar query, and the same annotation could give like could specify exemplars query that gives you some nice example. I hope we have some. I think.
Well, for the alerts, I guess that it would be useful also to have, like we have the query function, to have a query exemplar function, so that when you get your alert, you also have your Jaeger trace to click on it and you directly get to your trace. So that would be another function in the template, I guess.
Yeah.
To go even wider, and I had this disagreement with Julius several times, I consider alerting rules and recording rules almost equivalent from the user perspective, not from the implementation perspective, but yet. So I think they should behave the same as recording rules. Just emit a random exemplar. Just get it out there, see what people build and break, and what they would like for the version which actually does useful stuff or more useful stuff.
Yes, but the fact is that people don't actually use the alert metric as such for alerting, so...
I have several counterexamples. But I also mean make this part of the annotation. So what we send to Alert Manager automatically carries a trace ID, if there is a trace ID in the alert rule. Again, after you enable this experimental feature, not by default, but behind an experimental feature flag.
Nice.
Okay, we are at time, and I need to drop anyways. But was a good meeting, everyone, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.